Okay. So my name is Danielle Scollins, and I am the clinical director of Safe in Hunterdon. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the impact of domestic violence on the family. There's so much to talk about, but I hope to kind of get through all of this content in the allotted amount of time. So how we kind of break down domestic violence is by using the terms power and control. Domestic violence is really a pattern of coercive behavior in a relationship where one partner maintains or gains control over another through a pattern of fear and intimidation. And again, it's one of the most underreported crimes in America. When we talk about power and control, we're talking about using intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, using children to kind of gain that power and control over that individual, male privilege, economic abuse, and coercion and threats. And one of the biggest pieces of domestic violence is using this idea of minimizing, denying, or blaming that other partner for the behavior. So it could be used in an example where you come home and the house is a mess and your partner saying, well, why is the house a mess today? Not taking into consideration maybe all of the things that you had been doing for the day. So, and when you're talking about that, you're saying, well, if you just didn't do that, I wouldn't have had to react in that kind of way. So that's just kind of one example of how someone uses that minimizing or denying or blaming their partner for their behavior instead of just owning up to it or taking responsibility. So just some brief statistics. On average, nearly 20 million people per year are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. So during 1 year, this equates to more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner violence. And as I said, this is one of the most underreported crimes, and we can imagine these numbers are much higher. I know in the beginning, Jean had mentioned domestic violence rates kind of being down due to COVID, but something that we know as experts of domestic violence is that there's no space or time to kind of call or make these reports. So although rates may seem to be down, they're not. What we know based upon these dynamics are that just there's no way you can call a hotline. There's no way you can contact the police because your partner is constantly watching you. We were mandated to stay home, right? So leaving the house to go anywhere, a friend's house, to kind of tell them what's going on or anything, it just becomes so much more difficult. So the rates may be down, but just like statistics, it's the most underreported crime. So we can imagine, although we may not know about it, it's still there and going on. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. And this includes a range of behaviors that might not technically be considered domestic violence. So there's a difference between domestic violence and dysfunction in relationships. So dysfunction may be just when both partners are maybe using that physical violence against each other, but there's no fear and intimidation from one partner over the other. So that's the big distinction between the two. So it being an equal opportunity crime, it can really it can happen to anyone. Teens, adults, elderly, and disabled people experience it. It doesn't matter what race or ethnicity you are. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy, middle income, or poor. Anyone can experience this. I can tell you firsthand that I've had some of the wealthiest people in my office and also some of the poorest people in my office. So, it really doesn't discriminate. All educational levels, religious backgrounds, straight, gay, bisexual, transgender, again, male or female. I think sometimes we consider it more of a female issue versus a male issue. But if you look at just, gender roles and men coming out and stating that they're victims of domestic violence, it becomes even more difficult to kind of open up and admit that some of those dynamics are maybe happening in your home. So we can also consider that it's probably happening at a greater rate than even what we know. So there are all types of abuse that happen. I think oftentimes when we think about domestic violence, we think about the physical first, where the reality is there doesn't have to be any kind of physical violence in a relationship for it to have this dynamic of domestic violence going on. And sometimes, clients or survivors will be questioning, well, is this domestic violence? I'm really not sure. There's never been any kind of physical abuse happening. Where when you're talking through it with someone, identifying where that coercive control is coming from, that's how you can identify whether or not it's abuse, not that physical behavior. Because again, it could be that the relationship is dysfunctional versus domestic violence. And I think something I just really wanted to kind of bring home as a point to all of you is that emotional abuse is oftentimes worse than any kind of physical abuse that could happen in a relationship. And, I've heard this firsthand from survivors where the emotional abuse just becomes an everyday constant thing that people have to deal with. Oftentimes survivors will say, I knew as soon as my partner pulled in the driveway what kind of night it was going to be. And I wish that the physical violence would just happen to get it over with so we can kind of move on with the night. So that's how intense this emotional abuse could be. And you can also describe emotional abuse as kind of walking on eggshells, not feeling comfortable speaking in your own home. Put downs, or minimizing feelings, or denying the right to even have any. So that's why it becomes even more important for us to recognize that this emotional abuse is even worse than whatever physical abuse can happen. Something I'd also like to just kind of bring to your attention is abusers they come in all shapes and sizes, right? So abusers are controlling, but they don't lose control. They intentionally are using these behaviors. So oftentimes people are saying, oh, well, just go to anger management. That will solve the problem, when usually that can make the situation even worse. When you're talking about abusers healing, the best thing that an abuser can do if they're wanting to heal is that they can go to a batterer's intervention program, which is very long. But the reason that it is long is because it takes a long time to heal from abuse. So batterer's intervention programs, just to share a little bit about that, they're generally 26-week programs, which is roughly about 6 months. And there is kind of a check-in system that's going on. So really good anger management programs include group counseling, because people who have been in the program are able to hold the people who just enter the program accountable for their actions, and they can kind of see through that behavior. There's also a system where oftentimes the group leaders will call and check with the partner to make sure what that person is reporting in the group is actually what's going on at home. Abusers are possessive, and they're also very charming towards others, and they want a really good public image. So as I said, they come in all shapes and sizes. So people we least expect to be abusive are, which is really hard to kind of put your head around. But it's important for us to kind of recognize when someone is coming forward and saying that these things are happening in their home, the first response would be, well, no, I could never imagine your partner doing that to you. They're so nice and charming, and they're, the coach on the team, and all of these things that they want to kind of portray to the public, which is why it becomes even more important for us to believe when survivors do come forward and talk about what's been going on at home. As some of the other presenters have mentioned, domestic violence is trauma, right? So when someone has been impacted by trauma, oftentimes their presentation isn't really, what isn't believable at times, because they're, it could just be kind of a scattered presentation all over the place, where, you might be crying 1 minute or hysterical. And an abuser typically is very forthright and able to kind of just state facts and not have any emotions going on. So it can be even more believable that to believe in an abuser over that victim or survivor. they often want to also kind of twist that truth to make it seem like they're the victim in the situation. There's also this kind of justified male privilege by society, by religion, saying, well, you married this person, you kind of have to deal with it, go to marriage counseling. Um, as a counselor, when people come in and they say, oh, well, I want to come and do marriage counseling with my partner, we oftentimes would not recommend marriage counseling because we know that, abusers oftentimes don't want kind of like their dirty laundry out there. So one person might have an intention of fixing and healing a relationship where the other person still maybe doesn't want to address their behaviors. So it could be even more dangerous when someone leaves that counseling session and goes home and says, well, I can't believe you said that about me. How could you tell her or him that the stuff that's happening in our relationship? There's no even playing field in a sense. There's always one person having more power over another. I've had many clients who have told me, I've tried to go to marriage counseling, but it didn't work. And you're like, okay, well, tell me about that. Why didn't it work? When really I can imagine why it doesn't work. But that's just important for us to kind of recognize and realize that marriage counseling oftentimes doesn't work because there are different intentions behind that marriage counseling. Okay, so just some dynamics that we were kind of talking about before. Isolation. So isolation is such a big piece of domestic violence. And with COVID-19, isolation becomes even more difficult to deal with, because oftentimes what abusers will want to do is remove that victim from friends and family so that they don't have any resources or connections once they're able, or maybe wanting to take some steps to more independence or wanting to take steps to possibly leave the relationship. You'll notice that when you're isolated, you don't know who to go to, where to call, because there is so much isolation that goes on. And it's a part of that dynamic of having power and control over your partner. Oftentimes there's like this dominating effect where you're right, I'm wrong, and that partner doesn't allow you to explain, anything. It's just, nope, that's how it is, and that's how it's going to be. Could be degrading, verbal insults, physical or sexual demands, which makes it even more difficult, right? I can hear, many times from clients where they might say things like, we got into such a huge fight and then my partner demanded sex from me immediately after, and I just felt so degraded because we didn't make up, we were still in this huge fight, and then I was demanded that I had to have sex with this partner, which is just another form of abuse, and that feeling so degraded, and your partner wanting you to feel that way. Corruption, so the use of illegal drugs, illegal behavior. This can also happen as a way to make you look like a terrible parent when you're that survivor in the relationship or that victim in the relationship. And it's also a pattern. We need to remember that it's a pattern. It's not just one isolated incident that happens. Oftentimes it starts off really, really small, which we'll get to, and it increases over levels of intensity and frequency over time. So just continued dynamics, perception, right? So rejecting ideas or beliefs. This is also known as kind of spiritual abuse, where you have certain core beliefs that you hold near and dear to your heart or values, and you're not able to have those anymore in the relationship. Also, this experience of learned helplessness, where there's no apparent control, no means of stopping it, no means of escaping, because that abuser has wanted you to learn how to be helpless and not have any resources or people to rely on to get out. Also another, as I mentioned before, this idea of kind of walking on eggshells. So you're not able to kind of predict anything that happens within your household, which leads you to not have any control, whether it's over yourself, over your children, over your family. These threats continue to come and they're really unpredictable. Oftentimes we kind of describe it as the rug being slipped out from under you. because any given day can be very different. Maybe yesterday it was fine to have, you know, to maybe yesterday it was fine to have pasta for dinner, but today it's, well, how could you ever make that? You know, I hate that, and you did it wrong anyway. So it's just never knowing what to expect, even in the smallest situations. Um, Physical and sexual assault, that's also for purposes of control. So when this happens, it's, well, you better get in line, or these are going to be even more intense consequences. And it is really dangerous. So, it oftentimes, I'll just throw a statistic out there, it typically takes a survivor or victim on average 7 to 10 times to leave an abusive relationship. And when leaving, it becomes the most dangerous time because, you know, a, a perpetrator of violence can see that you're beginning to gain some sort of sense of control, or beginning to feel empowered. And that's when the violence typically becomes even more so. Maybe stalking increases. Maybe there's more rules that kind of come out as a result. Maybe, your phone's being tracked, or other, variety of things that can happen as a result of leaving the relationship, which is why safety planning is really important. That's something that we generally do when someone is leaving a relationship or choosing to stay in a relationship, which people do. And that's okay to stay in the relationship as long as you can keep yourself safe while staying there. So I was talking a little bit about before about this domestic violence continuum. So this really just kind of speaks to the subtle control and it increasing over time, right? If you go on a first date and that person is super mean and gets physically violent with you, of course you're not going to go out on that second date again. This is something that happens very slowly and over time. So it might be framed one way in the beginning, and over time it just becomes more intense. Like, the abusive partner might say something like, "Oh, I didn't like how your friend treated you that day. Did she ditch you for some reason? I don't think you should hang out with that person anymore." So it could be really subtle things like that, and framed in a way that's kind of, looking out and caring for you. But over time, it just increases and becomes more and more intense, where eventually you don't have any right to be making your own decisions. Physical violence typically doesn't happen in the beginning stages of a relationship when there is domestic violence. It typically happens much later on, much later on, when you don't have those resources or tools that you need in order to leave that abusive relationship. So just talking about some barriers really quick to leaving that abusive relationship. Um, we can talk about safety concerns, right? Safety is of the utmost importance to victims and survivors of domestic violence. And as I said before, when leaving, people are most at risk. So some quick safety tips that you can share, I can share, would just be, having all your documentation in order, like birth certificates, passports, knowing bank account information if you have any, creating a little, fund of money to keep on the side so that you have financial resources if you have access to any when it comes time to leave that relationship. It could be things like keeping a go bag in the car, or making sure you have a plan with a friend, or code words with your kids to know, if mommy or daddy says this word, that means that we're going to go to a neighbor's house to stay safe. So there's so many different ways that you can safety plan and talk about safety planning. And it becomes so important when you're thinking about leaving an abusive relationship or staying in that relationship. Lack of financial resources is really common with domestic violence. Just to kind of talk about some of those. So oftentimes, when you have finances, you have more options to leave a relationship. Oftentimes abusers will slowly, over time, decrease your level of independence by decreasing your resources. So that could be something like sabotaging you getting a job, or saying, well, I thought you were going to be staying home with the kids and being, a good mom or a good caregiver. Why are you going off to work? You don't need to go off to work, and trying to present it in a way that sounds really loving and caring, but really the goal at the end of it is to not have any financial resources, or saying, childcare is too expensive for you to go to work. You're going to have to stay home so you could support our family. I've seen so many things where, sometimes abusive partners will track mileage on the car, or make sure that that partner only have enough money or gas to get to certain places, or keep track of receipts. So there's so many different ways that lack of resources can be issues. Housing in Hunterdon County is really expensive too. When you're thinking about leaving an abusive relationship, it's something to consider, something for us to just have knowledge of and be aware of. Emotional and psychological barriers to leaving would just be the fear of the abuser, fear that this person's going to become more violent, fear of being alone, or fear of shame, not being able to kind of make that relationship work. Oftentimes in religious communities, this can be a really big barrier too, when you're supposed to hold marriage as the most sacred thing, which can be true for some religions, but also it's really important to consider the daily fear that and trauma that is there as a result of staying in that relationship. So also, just kind of continuing with this, there's this idea of traumatic bonding, which basically means people are experiencing really high highs and really low lows together. Another important thing just for me to mention is that, abusers and being in a domestic violence relationship, it isn't all bad all the time, which can be really hard for people outside of the relationship to understand. But that's how kind of, that perpetrator keeps that victim or survivor in the family and continues going. And oftentimes there's kind of like this hope for change where, he or she wasn't this way in the beginning of the relationship. I just want us to get back there. When oftentimes abusers in the beginning of the relationship are displaying their best qualities because they want to kind of hook that victim or survivor in. So there's always kind of that hope that things will go back to the way they were, or the way that they once were. There's always this feeling of ambivalence where you're not really sure what to do. That happens as a result of the trauma that's experienced as a result of the abuse. So not feeling sure, not really able to make your own decisions, which is really common because, survivors, by the time this kind of point comes where maybe you're considering leaving the relationship, you've lost the right to make decisions, whether that's in the relationship or in life, because of that increased isolation. Sometimes you begin to believe some of the messages that you're told, where it might be you're too dumb or too stupid to go out there and get your own job. Where are you going to be? You're going to have to come back to me eventually. So these are some of the ideas that continue to kind of stem and cause all of this anxiety and emotional distress when considering leaving. Also, there's this idea or wish to kind of remain intact, like the family intact, which can be important for some. Concerns about kids and their safety, where the reality is, kids only need one safe, supportive parent to thrive. And that's really important for us to know and understand. It doesn't benefit children to observe and feel that tension in the household all the time. There could be pressure to stay away from family, culture, religious organizations as another means to control. Low self-esteem as a result of the abuse. Oftentimes people think you have low self-esteem, which is why you enter the relationship, which is not true. It's not always true. It can be true, but it's not always true. Oftentimes that low self-esteem comes as a result of being in that relationship and experiencing that daily emotional abuse. I saw we had a couple of questions. How do you set boundaries? Okay. So it's almost impossible to set boundaries with a narcissistic person. It's really important for you to have your own sense of self and to know what your expectations are and not have any expectations of anyone else. Okay. I don't know if I answered that question fully. I'm seeing the other ones. More information on batter's intervention programs. So batter's intervention programs, you could just kind of look up online, or you could shoot me an email once this is done, and I can send you some more information on batter's intervention programs. That is, the best way to kind of do it. I told you a little bit about it, but I can kind of direct you to more specific resources if you'd like. Examples of abusive behavior when it comes to social media, great one. So some examples of that might be having access to your partner's social media account. It could be requiring your partner to give you passwords. It could be displaying images that you're not comfortable with online, right? So maybe you sext a picture to your partner and they're saying, well, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to post this picture and really embarrass you in front of your friends and family. It could be anything along those lines. There's so many different ways that people can use social media to track. Another really important thing just for us to kind of keep in mind is that, our location is always shared, right? So it's important that or like through certain apps, our location can be shared. So it's important for us to recognize that and know, like through Snapchat, turn your location off if you're not trying to share your location with your partner. That can be really important and things that people don't always know. So I hope that answered your question a little bit. I know we only have a couple more minutes, so I want to continue. How do abusers use children against their partners? So we see this a lot. Not letting them parent children the way they want to, or completely being undermined all the time, not supporting rules or boundaries that that the parent tries to implement. So it's kind of like team one and team two, right? Team A is trying to create boundaries within the household that are loving and supportive and show children that you care. The other parent is trying to completely dismantle so that the children don't trust whatever that survivor or victim is saying. Restricting access to resources, which is also a means of financial abuse, abusing the children as a way to punish their partner, not paying child support. Another thing just for me to quickly mention is that also making reports of abuse or neglect to DCPMP or other outside sources. So once you leave an abusive relationship, something important for me to just note is that that doesn't always mean that that it's going to be over, that the abuse is going to end. Which is really important, right? Because sometimes we make this assumption that, okay, well, the relationship is over, maybe the abuse will stop, where there's also this idea of post-separation abuse that happens, where it might be fighting for custody or messing up visitation schedules just to kind of put the other parent out. Court dates as a means to control your partner's schedule or create an ability to work or maintain that stable job for your kids. So there's all sorts of ways that the partner can continue disrupting your life, even if that relationship ends. So different parenting styles of an abuser. So it could be something like being very authoritarian with the children or being very overly permissive. It can go both ways. And parents typically have that one or the other when you're an abuser. Controlling access to support systems like grandparents or coaches or people who can be supportive influences in their kids' lives, not being an active parent, maybe missing visitation, and that burden falls on the kids at the end of the day. Undermining the other parent or contradicting their rules all the time. If mom says this, then that means you're going to do this. So kids never having that sense of safety or security. Fostering disrespect or talking poorly about the other parent. Sorry, I know time is almost up. Potential effects in children who witness violence. So there's all different stages and all different ways that kids react to domestic violence. And it's really hard to say the specific effects, but these are just a couple of them. So in infant stage, the needs for attachment are disrupted. Oftentimes when abuse happens in a relationship, an abuser doesn't like attention off of him or her. So that's important just to kind of note that infants are going to be even impacted by this behavior, even though maybe you don't think so because they're so tiny and small. their secure attachments or poor eating habits, or getting the stress from mom. Preschool age, I saw some questions coming in. I want to get to those too. Preschool children, lack of feeling safety. Maybe the kids are preoccupied with mom's safety at home, so they can't concentrate in school. Oftentimes, many kids might come in and say, or be like misdiagnosed with ADHD because they can't concentrate. And oftentimes that can be a result of the trauma that they've experienced at home. A lot of anxiety, regression behaviors, maybe wetting the bed, insomnia or perinsomnia, meaning that they either can't sleep, or when they are sleeping, maybe they're sleepwalking or sleep talking. So not getting that restful sleep. School age children oftentimes experience self-blame. Well, maybe if I didn't do this, mom and dad wouldn't fight. Somatic complaints like headaches or tummy aches, aggressive behaviors or regressive behaviors. In adolescence, there's a lot of school truancy because, there's no time or space for them because there's just so much trauma going on within the home. It could be substance abuse that happens as a result too, which is really important, right? If someone wants to numb their mind, especially in adolescence, they're going to turn to drugs or alcohol, which is not a good skill, because then there's going to be, so many other things that happen as a result. So just some more impact on children. Children and youth who are exposed to domestic violence can experience a variety of issues which impact that developmental growth. So for children to develop like quote unquote normally, they need to go through those developmental stages, which can oftentimes be interrupted by that trauma. They lose the ability to feel empathy for others, socially isolated maybe, and the impact's going to look different for all kids depending upon the protective factors and the risk factors. Protective factors could be something like having one strong, stable adult in their lives, whether it's a coach, a grandparent. Risk factors could be, things that are not being taken care of at home. Maybe there are some substance abuse issues going on with the parents as well as the domestic violence. So it's going to look different for all kids. Oops, and we're done. And I see that there are some questions too. Okay, given the post-separation abuse, how do you direct someone who feels it's safer, have more control, stay in the relationship? What are resources then? So we come from the philosophy that you cannot tell a victim or survivor what to do, right? And that's the most important thing that I'd like to say today. People need to be in the right state, in the right frame of mind when they feel like it is the best time for them to kind of leave that relationship. And only that person can tell us what makes them feel most comfortable. What you can do is kind of go through some safety planning tips to make sure that they're staying safe while continuing in that relationship, having a really good understanding, or coming up with that safety plan. If something happens, I'm going to go here, I'm going to call a hotline to kind of get that safe, supportive housing. Safer only compared to leaving. Yeah, so yeah, that's just some of the stuff that I would be talking about. And we can provide you with additional resources as well to guide that practice for you all, because safety planning is really important. It's important it's done with an advocate too, because we might kind of safety planning is not going to look the same for everyone, which is really important to know. Sometimes you can get a restraining order, sometimes it's not safe to. So it's going to look different depending upon the circumstances and situation. I know time is up, but I wanted to say thank you all so much for allowing me to present this information for you. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me.
Great.
Thank you, Danielle. That was an amazing presentation.
That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
So everyone, we're going to have a little closing statement here, and then we'll let you off the hook and let you go. So I just wanted to, well, first of all, my name is Nick Marcantuno. I'm a family partner with Harvest Family Success Center. I've kind of been behind the scenes here. You've seen me pop up a couple times, but I wanted to come on and say thank you to everyone for attending today's conference. And thank you to our speakers, Jean, Karen, Wendy, Danielle. All the presentations were fantastic, and I think you all learned a lot from those presentations. A couple housekeeping things before we end. Paige is going to post a link to the pre and post test in the chat. You can get to that by pressing the chat button at the bottom of your screen and fill that out to be entered into the drawing for the $100 gift card. And also, if you want your CEUs, you also have to fill that out. So that's super important. If you miss it right now, we're going to be sending a follow-up email with the link, so you can get that even if you miss it in the chat. And Karen, do you want to talk about some of the upcoming events we have?
Well, we have a webinar every month, and I'm sure some of our speakers will be reappearing with different topics. If you have any topics you would like us to develop, we have a whole team of curriculum developers. Please do let us know, because that's how we choose what we do. And I really want to invite you to our next one on December 9th, Lunch and Learn. It's called Managing Stress and Keeping a Positive Attitude During the Holiday. And you might go, oh, sigh, heard that before. But this is going to be trivia. It's going to be a lot of fun. There are going to be prizes throughout. It's just a little bit of lightheartedness pre-holiday season, or I guess holiday season. So it's free, and there will be many prizes throughout. So we hope to impart some good, interesting and useful information in a really fun way. So that link will be coming out to everybody shortly. And I just want to thank you for tuning in. I know there's lots of webinars out there, and we feel really privileged to have had close to 100 people join us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that does it, right, Nick?
That does it.
Okay, guys, have a good one. Good luck on the $100 gift card. But remember, you have to be in it to win it. Take care.